Wait, what fucking things off?
We're gonna roll with it anyways. welcome to week 5. It starts off like that Green Day song. You remember that song, "Time of Your Life," where he screws up and he acknowledges it. That's how this podcast is getting started. We feel like Green Day. Welcome. We're talking running backs in this video, if it wasn't clear at this point. But before we get started, we have this trial for our NFL package. But what's included in the NFL package is position rankings, projections, premium sheets, must-have tools like DVP rankings, points per attempt, red zone utilization, optimized lineups for DraftKings and FanDuel, access to player ownership percentage. So make sure you check that out. I was technologically deficient the last time, but here you go. We've got optimized DFS lineups and tools, rotocurve.com/NFL-trial. Make sure you take advantage of that because it is pretty sweet to get some things for free. Jim, what do you think about running backs this week? It's kind of a weird week where David Johnson's playing on Thursday, so there's not really above and beyond an elite option. I guess you got to like Le'Veon Bell, but I kind of wish, it was a week where Johnson was playing on Sunday because I love this matchup for him. What do we think at running back?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I really booched that opening.
Which is now our new term, booched. So hashtag booched us. I don't even know how you spell it. I guess it's BOOCHED would be my guess.
That might be it. No, I agree with you. It's atop the market. It kind of seems like it's Le'Veon. And then, a lot of the RB1s, if you think about it this year, the high volume guys even haven't really delivered in terms of Lamar Miller. We're still waiting for that touchdown. Everybody pronounced, CJA, like Anderson was supposed to be this amazing breakout after running all over the Panthers. Now it looks like the Panthers actually aren't that tough, and it was actually just like that might be a passing offense. I don't know. My point being is that there's not a lot of differentiation past Bell, so I could see Bell as your cash guy, particularly just because of the volume in the passing game. He's so amazing with total yardage. But, past him kind of being like the Antonio Brown of running backs, actually, it's fitting. I actually like Shady McCoy in cash. He's getting 64% of the carries there. I mean, that includes having a run-heavy so really, of the running backs, he's actually getting 70+% because, you take out Tyrod's designed runs. He's getting 20, right around 20% of the target share. And really, like, the Rams aren't an entirely intimidating rush defense. They're not bad either, but they're middle of the pack. Last year, they allowed the second most receptions to running backs. Some of that had to do with Laurinaitis being somewhat terrible. But, I just think it's a volume play. Shady's due 20-plus touches. He's going to drive the offense. I think I understand that, like, Robert Woods has a 29% market share in targets over the last 2 weeks, and that's helpful. But I actually think Shady's the one who really benefits. You saw them run a design bubble screen for him in the red zone last week. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets 4 or 5 touchdowns going forward in the passing game, just as a design. That wasn't just like a breakout play. That was something where they're scheming to get him the ball in space. He's the real playmaker outside of Tyrod now. I just think you're going to see a lot of dump-offs and a lot of motion to get Shady the ball. So he's my main cash guy. Other than him, it's Jordan Howard. Again, a guy last week, he got 89% of the carries. He got, 12% of the targets. He's productive in both phases. The week before, he saved the day with like a 90-plus total yard game with 45 yards in the passing game. The Colts, they shut down Melvin Gordon. That might be a Melvin Gordon problem. I actually think that Jordan Howard is pretty talented here and in a good position. And more importantly, the volume's there. I mean, they want to commit. John Fox is old school. So if you give me 20 touches against the Colts, even if it's it worked out for Gordon with the touchdowns, but I just think total yardage-wise, the floor is really high. So between those two, I think you can afford that running back that backfield, and it's really not that expensive.
Yeah, the good thing about Howard, too, is 100% of the red zone rushes over the last 2 weeks, so no one is vulturing him quite literally. Even with the volume, huge uptick to 23 rushes last week, he still was 4.8 yards per carry. So, per game, 7.3, 5.0, 4.8 yards per carry. So even though, opponents know it's coming at this point, Howard just looks locked in as the number one back. And I think that's where I'm starting in cash. I'm with you. I think this is a week that I'm going to kind of go cheap cheap with my running backs, because I think the other one I really like is Jerick McKinnon. I mean, at 4,000 on DraftKings, he kind of showed me something last week. They kept going to him. I know Asiata scored, but McKinnon touched the ball 4 times in the red zone himself, which was really unusual for him, quite honestly. And he ended up with 18 rush attempts, 3 catches on 5 targets. So he kind of turned into the back that we've been waiting for, especially if he's going to get some of those targets in the red zone. I think there's just simply too much volume against the Houston team, obviously without J.J. Watt now. I think there's just too much here for too little of a price. The other backs in that price range are like Jeremy Hill, DeAndre Washington, Latavius Murray, who've got a lot more to worry about. I mean, McKinnon, even if he gets those goal line carries, taken from him, I think he's a threat for 100 yards, which gives you the bonus. So I think McKinnon and Howard are the way I'm going to spend up at receiver and cash. Let's go to tournaments, because there are a lot of interesting tournament options this week. There are a lot of backfields that are in turmoil. So let's see where you start there. Who do you like in tournaments?
Well, actually, McKinnon's on my list in tournaments. I just think, the breakout potential there, and I think there is something to be said about, there's a lot of on-off splits with Watt, where they become a mid-level rush defense as opposed to a top 5. So yeah, I agree, it's exploitable. Plus, he's just he's a big play threat, and I think with the goal line, red zone kind of stuff, this is kind of a narrative, but not really in terms of team building. I don't know if we see Peterson again. We're not going to see Peterson this year. But I don't know if we see Peterson again next year in this team. So they have to see if this guy can be their every down back. So I think there is an agenda to try to get this guy more seasoning. Plus, he's a playmaker. He gets by guys. So I think as long as it's not at the 1 yard line, he actually could, I think, like you said, get a share of the valuable red zone carries. Terrence West is actually a guy that I don't mind in tournaments. I think the floor could be pretty low because we could see Kenneth Dixon come in here and be the total yard guy. So there's obvious, but there's, at the same time, there was no receiving value with West going in anyway. The selling point here is home favorites against a rush defense that's given up the most yards per carry, 5.15 yards per carry, the most rushing yards per game. People are just running all over this Washington defense. It's Chris Baker, who's a pretty good run stuffer, but there's really nobody else. Their linebackers are pretty listless, Mason Foster and those guys, and there's just not really a whole lot to bank on. They have also even just lost their strong safety, David Bruton, who's doing a lot of his work in the box. So I think West is a guy. I also love Devonta Freeman. No one's going to be on him, I think, in tournaments just because the Denver name tag scares you off. We saw, we've seen guys do semi-okay this year. I mean, at least Jeremy Hill put up 2 touchdowns. There's some work to be had here, and I just think Freeman has the majority share, the valuable share. I mean, there is some talk about Tevin Coleman's health. I mean, I wish him the best. He seems like he's going to be a full go. But at the same time, Freeman's just the kind of guy who I think for 100 total yards and possibly a touchdown at this price tag is pretty valuable. Plus, if they do get down, I would see him as the more valuable receiver, even if we've seen Coleman get some work before. I think it's becoming clear in the no huddle that Freeman's their guy.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree. I don't think Coleman's a full go, even if they say it. I mean, we've seen this scenario where Ryan Clark had the sickle cell thing and played in Denver, and he needed to have some internal organs removed after that. So I think it's a bad idea. I don't even think he should be traveling, but I think even when he gets there, maybe he gets 5 carries, and they got to be careful with this. This is a really scary thing that could, lead to literally death. So I think they need to be extra careful here. I think Devonta Freeman's definitely a tournament option for that reason. Other guys I like. I think this is a good matchup for Todd Gurley. Hopefully they can keep stretching the field with Brian Quick and some of these other guys because this Buffalo defense is susceptible, allowed 5 rushing touchdowns so far. And we've talked about it kind of every week. I'm not the world's biggest believer in Rob Ryan. I don't think he should be a coordinator. So I think Gurley finally finds a way to get going. He's been pretty slow, but it's to the point, where even in a good matchup, we can't really use him in cash for this price tag. So I'm passing there, but definitely using in tournaments. Theo Riddick. I mean, they keep talking about Zach Zenner and Washington and these other guys getting the carries, and I'm fine with it. I mean, Riddick's a guy who caught 80 passes last year. I don't care how much he carries the ball as long as they're throwing it to him. He's kind of half of Le'Veon Bell. where he's lining up, all over the place, and they're getting him the ball in the passing game. As long as they continue to do that, I certainly have some interest. C.J. Anderson against the aforementioned Atlanta Falcons, whose defense really isn't good against anything, but also against the run. I think Anderson should be the focus, especially if Paxton Lynch is the guy. I think that's an uptick to his matchup. I like DeMarco Murray. Is a guy that I really like. Another one I'm going to have some tournament shares of. Miami defense on paper is kind of in the middle with Sue up front. And they've got some decent guys in the front seven to help stop the run. But Murray's just been so good, and he gets the volume that it's hard to pass there. And how about DeAndre Washington as a speculative guy this week? I'm sick of Latavius Murray, and I think this matchup against San Diego is the time to speculate here, because the touches have been close, even though Washington's playing way, way, way less snaps, or at least has to this point. But against a susceptible defense, I think if Murray gets off to a slow start, they finally just say, even after Washington fumbled last week, like, let's give this kid a try. And I don't think there's anything to lose. He's been catching passes, so he's got kind of a decent floor. But I think there is 20% chance that this week the touches finally start to go where, they've been on the decrease for Murray. I think it starts to go where Washington actually touches the ball more this week. And I'm willing to take a shot on that in tournaments while, try and get ahead of the curve on that before everyone else does. So you tell me if I'm crazy there. For 3,400 on DraftKings, I certainly think it's worth it, even if he's just the third down back and I end up wrong.
Yeah, I think the ceiling's really high, right? Especially because we've seen his big playability. The floor is fairly low, but yeah, it's kind of a 40-40-20 kind of share now, it seems like, between, I think it's Jalen Richard, somebody said. I don't know. But the third back. Yeah. Basically,
yeah, Jalen Richard, that's correct.
Yeah, Murray's had fewer touches with each successive week. And we talked about it in the preseason about how I went back and looked at, basically, for backs with as many touches as he did last year, he was 75th out of 75 backs in the last 10 years to have that workload, to have 250 in PPR points, to have that many, to have 240 touches or carries and 30-plus catches. He's just not an efficient running back, and I think the team's realizing what we realized in a spreadsheet in August. The other guy that I actually don't mind, I know game flow might not be perfect for it, but I just think the offense will change here and adapt to Tom Brady's skill set, is James White. He's on pace for 52 catches already now, even in this kind of scaled down weirdo Jacoby Brissett world that we were living in the last 2 weeks. Now we're entering this the playbook completely opens up. It's not scaled down. And, this is a guy who last year was second behind Charles Sims in fantasy points per route. He was 0.4358 fantasy points per route, which is a really, really high number. Obviously, it was second only to Sims. And it was at a high volume rate. This is, in the second half, he was the Dion Lewis guy. He didn't have Lewis's upside in the rushing department, but you don't really need that, like you said, with your Riddick love. I think he's kind of a cheap Riddick in a lot of ways. I think 6 catches, 50 yards, 60 yards, the ability for any red zone work. He's only 3,900. You're talking about a guy, if you want to pay for a Le'Veon Bell in a tournament or pay for, some of these big receivers that we're going to mention in the next video, I think White's a guy who you can get away with getting 12 to 15 fantasy points from.
Yeah, I think you got to take a stand. I'm glad you went there, because that was going to be my last tidbit, was on this Patriots backfield. You either think that Brady, despite the numbers and the stats, is going to still manage a solid game, or you think that, because Brady has averaged less fantasy points when they are such big favorites, that they're going to get up, and then LeGarrette Blount's going to get his carries. So I think LeGarrette Blount is also a sharp play in tournaments, because I think everyone assumes now that with Brady back, his workload's going to go way down. But if they do get up, let's say, 28-0, even 24-0 against a pretty crappy Browns team, I do think there is a possibility where we still see, 15 to 18 carries for LeGarrette Blount, maybe even in a half. And if he scores on 1 or 2 of them, you're looking at a pretty solid play. His price is way up there, but there is a possibility where that pays off. That being said, I do like James White as the higher upside play. Maybe you go Brady, James White, Edelman, or something like that. But we'll get to that in stacks. It's an interesting way to go about it. It's certainly contrarian to go with Blount. And it's interesting either way, honestly, because James White hasn't really been that big of a factor, but we know Brady will make him viable. I think that's all we got to say today in terms of running backs. But before we go, make sure you try the NFL package, which includes, things like position rankings, projections, cheat sheets, DVP rankings, points per attempt, red zone utilization, optimized lineups, access to player ownership percentage. I could go on and on and on. So make sure you try that, rotocurve.com/NFL-trial. You get all that for free. Obviously, we will be right back with some receivers for this week, so stay tuned.